This is a film of startling humanity. Ozu is so honest and generous with us, he communicates without guise or flourish. He shows us what it means to be human in the most direct yet gentle way. He respects his characters too much to distract the viewer from their lives. He gives us the opportunity to sit with them, we join them in quiet communion. This will always be my favorite film. Those are words from director Andrew on Yasujirō Ozu's 1949 film, Late Spring. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer. And each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia. Today we're talking Late Spring. Quick synopsis of the film is several people try to talk the 27-year-old Noriko into marrying, but all she wants is to keep on caring for her widowed father. The film stars Shishu as Shikuchi Sumiya, Setsuko Hara as Noriko Sumiya, Yumeji Tsukioka as Aya Kitagawa, and Haruko Tsujimura as Masa Taguchi. It's written by Kogonoda and Yasujirō Ozu, cinematography by Yuharu Atsuta, directed by Yasujirō Ozu, edited by Yoshiyasu Hamamuda, music by Senji Ito, and costumes by Bonjiro Suzuki. Today, my guest is Seth Vargas. He's a three-timer at this point. He's been on, now this is the third time. First time was for Le Bonheur, Agnès Varda. Second time, Woman in the Dunes. And now we're here to talk about an Ozu film. So before we get into it, Seth, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I was dying when we did the Woman in the Dunes episode. I was so sick that I completely erased it from my memory, even though I listened to that episode. Yeah, completely forgot about that. But hey, what a triple set of films to be talking about.
Right?
My
Jeez.
God. As you were reading them back, I was like, yeah, greatest of all time. Yeah. Holy moly.
Only the best with Seth, and today we're talking about Late Spring. As I said, he's been on a couple times before. Highly recommend going back and listening and finding out about his podcast, Movie Friends podcast, and just his beginnings in films. But before we get into Late Spring, before we get into Ozu, I'm wondering what you've watched in the past couple of weeks that you think people should add to their watch list.
Absolutely. How many do you want?
As many as you want. Usually people give 2 to 3, but not trying to limit you.
Okay. All right. First, let me say, whenever I do advertising for your show, I always say only the best movies ever. And then I realize how few of them that I have seen. And I'm like, oh my God, I really need to watch better movies.
I'm just picking the good directors. So they're doing the work for me, to be honest.
I watched a movie recently called Ghostwatch, which came to Shudder. And it's a horror film. It's from the BBC. I think it was like 92 or 93. They did a Halloween special. And what they did was they used some of their real life news anchors. And yeah, they did this pre-recorded thing, but they presented it as a live special televised event looking into like paranormal happenings.
Okay.
And so it starts out just like you're watching like not quite a news, like there's not like a news desk, but like a talk show, kind of like a late night news talk show thing. And I won't say anything, but the story kind of goes from there. There's different people, there's like the eyewitness reporter who's like on location. There's like the dude, they're having people call in, telling their own stories. And it caused an outrage in England when they did this. They received 1 million phone calls.
Oh.
Yes. So it's like the British equivalent of the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. If you like horror, and maybe even if you don't, it's really worth checking out. Apparently it was like hard to find for a while. I watched it because someone recommended it on Twitter. And since then I've seen like almost as many people saying that they're watching it as are watching like Dune 2 right now. Oh, yeah. So whenever that happens, it's something that was unavailable to stream for a while, or like the DVD's out of print, but it's really cool. So it's called Ghostwatch, one word. Real cool movie. And then I watched a movie off of your recommendation. I'm not sure you grabbed me by the shoulders and said, watch this movie. But I remembered somewhere along the line you saying, hey, this movie is not as bad as people say that it is. And that is The Rage, Carrie 2.
Yep. Banger.
Another horror movie. And I threw it on. I watched Cannibal Holocaust for the first time, which I did not enjoy.
No.
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 But I don't think it's necessarily meant to be enjoyed. And I will say I was blown away by how they told the story, like the layout of the story. I thought it was just, following people into the jungle and watching them getting killed. I didn't realize that there was this whole other thing going on. Anyway, after I finished Cannibal Holocaust, I was like, I need to watch something different. Saw that the Rage Carrie 2 was on, and I was like, Felicia stands up for this movie. I'm gonna watch it. And I agree with you. I think I rated it the same as you, 3.5 stars. This is a movie that I heard my entire life how horrible and terrible and just irredeemable it was. And then I watched it and I was like, what's the big deal? Like, why are you so angry? What's the problem?
I don't know why it got such a bad rap. I remember renting it from like a video store.
Yeah.
Thinking, I think at the time, probably like, oh, this is going to be silly and corny. And sometimes it is, but I was like, no, this is actually good. It's not, you can't compare it to the first one, right? They're completely different.
No, not at all. I mean, yeah, the De Palma Carrie is like one of my top 3 horror movies ever. Like, it's one of the only American slasher Stephen King kind of horror movies that I really like, which I know is a pretty extreme statement, but I think most of those are just not good. But this was it was fun. It was pretty great. And then I'll talk about a movie that we did for our show, which I had never seen before, which was Set It Off. In February, we did films from all Black directors, and for the first time, we had people from our Patreon suggest a film, and then people vote on them. And there were a lot of options. I think Set It Off was the only one that I had like never seen before. And so it's not that I wasn't pushing for that one, but when it was picked, I was like, oh man, what is this going to be?
Yeah.
And I was really blown away by it. Like, it's got huge tonal shifts and it might be a little too long, but overall, I was really, really surprised by it. And then I was extremely surprised to find that like no one has seen this movie. And it seems like the type of movie that people at least claim that they're clamoring for. Like, it's 4 female Black leads. It's fun. It's got a good ending. Like, so if you haven't seen Set It Off, directed by the great Fast and the Furious and Friday director F. Gary Gray, check it out. Yeah.
There you go. I love when podcasts I listen to do a film that I haven't seen, because then it like kind of pushes it up the watch list for me, where I'm like, okay, well, I can't listen to the episode if I haven't watched the film, because I'm sure there's spoilers, I assume. So yeah, I haven't seen that one. So excited for it.
It's good. It's cool. It's cool to see all these actors that we know, like Vivica A. Fox, Jada Pinkett Smith. They're all like super, super young. Dr. Cox from Scrubs is like the police officer who's chasing them. So it was also
Love it.
really crazy to see him. As like, he's basically doing the Dr. Cox thing, but as a police officer. So yeah,
that's fun. I love that. Well, I love all those recommendations, and I can definitely vouch for all of them, even if I haven't seen them. But we are here to talk about Ozu, specifically Late Spring. I'm wondering if you recall the first time you would have watched this, what made you put it on, and what your thoughts were on that watch.
Definitely. So I watched this thanks to Letterboxd. I can tell you exactly the first time I watched this. I watched this July 9th of 2022. I wrote a joke review for it, which I guess is in the style of a clickbait article. And so it says, this daughter refused to get married. What the father does next, you won't believe.
I did see that, and
And
I
yeah,
love that.
I kind of stand by
It's accurate.
that. Not to totally go off the rails, but I was thinking about how anti just everything with Letterboxd people are. People are so serious. Like, you can't
Yeah,
write a
no.
joke review. You can't write a book. You can't. And I was like, you know what, man? How about this? I just finished a movie. Don't give me homework. Sometimes I'm just putting things in so that I'll remember parts of it that I like. Leave me
Hmm.
alone. Like, this is a diary. It might be public, but I don't need you leafing through every single thing, being like, this sucks. This sucks. You suck.
No, I mean, I treat mine just like, oh, this person was hot. I like this scene. Sometimes I'll just talk about other movies during
Yeah.
my review for it.
Yeah.
But I just try and write something as like as a reminder for myself.
I've noticed a pattern in yours, which I don't know if you have noticed or not. And I don't know if you
Oh
want me to
God.
reveal what I've
Please. No, I love
noticed.
it.
Something that I've noticed that you always take note of are things that don't matter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like you'll be like, this person wasn't important. This scene didn't need to be there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Felicia's on the chopping
Sometimes.
block. It's not like every single one, but
No, I know. I do notice that. That's usually when I'm like trying to justify maybe the rating I'm giving it. Even though I
got it.
feel like I'm, you know, and not to get into a whole thing about it, but you know how when people post like their rating scales or whatever,
Yeah.
mine for like 4 or 5 stars is very high because I love throwing out 5 stars. If I had a great time with it, 5 stars. Like I don't have any fear for it. So for me to give something lower, I feel like I need to justify why
Right. Got
I
it.
gave something lower and why it's this,
I'm the
as opposed to
opposite.
me fully hating it. Yeah.
I feel like I need to justify why I'm giving something 5 stars.
Oh, really? Oh, no, I just feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
I watched this because I was just trying to devour as much Ozu as I possibly could. I
Hmm.
think the first film of his that I watched was I Was Born But. And I
Okay.
watched
Nice.
it primarily because the title was so odd. I was like, oh, that's weird. Let me throw this on. And was just like entranced as I am with everything that I've seen by him. He just puts you like into this spell. Like, he puts you under a spell, and he puts you into a state. I feel like, I'm a stressed and anxious person. I feel like I just like can't be when I'm watching
Hmm.
Ozu. Like, I have to come under his tempo and under like his vision for things. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about it, but I think
Hmm.
it has to do with so many static shots and how people look. I know some people have a problem with all the smiling.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Didn't
Yeah, there's a
realize
lot
people
here.
had a problem with it, but
Yeah. But if I find this loose trilogy, which is it's at times the loosest and tightest trilogy
hmm.
ever, because it's the same thing 3 times.
Yeah.
And can you think of anyone else who's ever done that?
No, not the separate movies. The only
Like,
thing that I watched a Hal Hartley film recently called Flirt, and it's 3 separate films within one short films, and it's the same story, different actors 3 times. So that's the only time I could think
oh,
of it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
interesting.
different settings, different actors, but it's the exact same script, basically. Everything else is the same. But in terms of like making full blown films, like they're the same, but also different in a way.
Right.
I respect that.
I always comment on John Carpenter with Donald Pleasance. You have Dr. Loomis throughout Halloween, and then in Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, his name is also Loomis. Okay, like I would feel so silly if I was Donald Pleasance. Like, oh, what's my character's name? Be like, it's Loomis again. So I mean, that's like the only thing I can really think of. But what he does here with these 3 movies, it feels like meditating. Like, it
Mhm.
feels like, you're pondering this idea and you're following it along, and you're letting him like guide you through this process. And then he's like, okay, now let's do it again. And let's see like the slight variations. Okay, now let's do it again and see like the slight
Hmm.
variations. I love it. It's a miracle. It's a miracle of filmmaking. These films.
I mean, yeah, I like what you said about it being meditative
Hmm.
because I feel like when you start watching these films, you're like, okay, a lot of people think it's an older film, it's Japanese, and already some people don't like watching subtitles, like this is gonna be slow, but then like it really sucks you in. And then
Hmm.
you're like so engrossed in what's gonna happen to these two. Even though it's not like it's a high stakes, really, it's high stakes for them. But it's not a
Correct.
huge
Yeah.
high stakes
Yeah.
film, but you're just like, I need to know, right? Because it's like it's so relatable. Even if most of us weren't married off, it could just be translated to like, my parents want me to go to this school, my parents want me
Yeah.
to be this in my profession. So that's Ozy for you. But I
Yeah.
mean, we've already started talking about it, the film, so we might as well continue on this. I was reading a bit about this, what the Japanese term is for like a modern family drama, which is, and hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Shomengeki.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. That's like the Western version. Yeah. Shoshimin Iga is the other, which I'm sure if you know how to speak Japanese, neither of us did too great on that. But
probably not. Yeah. As I said, I will be putting a disclaimer at the beginning of this episode that I apologize to the people of Japan
yeah.
for my Canadian transgressions. But it's like a genre that Ozu helped define in his own way and popularize this style of storytelling of like just showing the lives of like everyday people, like we were saying, and making them interesting by not making them this grandiose people or anything that's happening that's particularly interesting. But I think people really, at the end of the day, want to watch themselves in a way or people they
Mm,
know. So it makes it so that you're just like so engrossed in what they're doing and what's going to happen to these two people. I'm wondering how you feel about the way, if we talk in a broader scope of his work, how he operates in terms of, showing the lives of everyday people, specifically because he loves to show families and their
yeah.
dynamics.
All I could think on this rewatch, right, is how, as modern, enlightened, educated film lovers, right, we have access to all different kinds of stories and we can define whole film movements, right, because we
Hmm.
have the gift of hindsight. And you take Late Spring, which I can't remember what position it ended up at the last Sight and Sound poll. At one point, it was number 15. It might not have been this last time was number 15, but like Tokyo Story is like top 3 or top 2 sometimes. And I tried to think of like a modern equivalent to this type of story and how we would view it as probably garbage, or like we would disregard it as just a soap opera y or
Hmm.
silly or nothing happens or it's a simple love story or relationship story. And I was trying to think of like modern movies that just deal with, like you said, normal everyday life and how we can be pretty hypocritical, you
Hmm.
know. And if we say, oh, well, it's Ozu, it's the best of all, it's been named this and he's all these things, suddenly it like becomes important. And that really drove home, like looking at it like that really drove home to me the importance of what he's doing with these family dramas and what he's doing. You know, they call his shot the pillow shot, right? And I was thinking about how beautiful it is that this way of looking that's been named after him, or you know, that he's known for, is
Hmm.
just human level, sitting around a table looking at people head on as they speak to you. That's the view that he chose to like show art through. Not big sweeping technical advancements, just like, hey, what if we just looked at each other? And what if we heard each other? And what if we witnessed the little moments in everybody's day? If you focus on that, if the camera isn't moving and you don't have to remember 6,000 names and plot points and twists and turns, if all you're thinking about are like this dude and his daughter, how beautiful that can be. And it was like, I don't want to say I cried because I didn't, but
Yeah.
it was very beautiful just thinking of like what a gift he gave to elevate, that movement that you were talking about. The whole idea is the middle class of modern Japan. And what a gift he gave, and what a way to like honor that time period and class of people by just showing them honestly, beautifully. We're not getting, we do get a little like toenail clipping in this movie.
Hey, that's honest.
Well, I was like, I wish that we saw this more, honestly,
Yeah.
in movies. More grooming in movies, I think, should be done. But we're not laughing at them, and like what drama he pulls from just everyday life. It's great. It's amazing.
I agree with all that. Like, and then you see his influence on certain directors later who've kind of put their own spin on it, like Jarmusch or
Hmm.
Karasmaki, who are huge fans of Ozu and
Hmm.
love to just show regular people everyday life without it being some huge show.
Hmm.
But they're doing it in their own way because, you know, they have their own artistic interests. But
Yeah.
I do love this story, and in particular, like my next point being this is a story, it's a father-daughter story. So
Yeah.
we have gotten that in before this, we've gotten it post this. It's always interesting the way that dynamic is tackled and the
Hmm.
way it's interesting the way people talk about it in real life, father-daughter
Hmm.
dynamics, because I feel like especially nowadays, or at least our generation, I'm not gonna talk for the younger one. I'm hoping dads now are more present.
Yeah.
But I was lucky to have a dad who was very present, and I have a great relationship with my dad. I'd say like 90% of my girlfriends do not. So I think there's
Yeah.
always like that. Everyone talks about daddy issues. This is not about that, but I guess there are issues that they're not addressing, but it's not the issues that we think of when we're talking about father and daughter
Yeah.
dynamics. This is a beautiful dynamic, and it's two people who are so used to each other and so attached to one another that they don't really think of having another life until someone else tells them, hey, this is not correct. And because
Right.
that's the way they view it. And
Right.
that breaks it. And there's a division. So you are a father, but you have sons, but you can, I'm sure, still relate to the fact of what it is to have a relationship with your child.
Yeah.
And for someone to come in and break that or think about it in like future because your kids are still young, when is it that, you're supposed to break things off, right? There's no definite date, year, like point in life, but we're talking about old world Japan mixing with new world Japan in this film. Wondering how you feel about how that's addressed in this film because I think it's really well done of just being like, there's people who have a different older mindset, and she's just being like, I don't think I need to marry, but they cannot accept that, right?
Right.
How does that relate to things that you see in real life and other films that might have tackled that?
You're also a parent, and so I think that
Mhm.
you'll totally understand both parties here are sympathetic to the position that the other one is in life.
Mhm.
With Noriko, we learn that she became ill due to being made to do forced labor during the war.
Mhm.
And she's just now coming back around. And then Noriko is looking at her dad as, an older widower. He needs people around to help him do things. He has an assistant, he has her. And so while each one could want something for themselves, I think it's that sympathy for each other that allows their bond to kind of last. I'm not even going to say longer than it should, because I think that they could have lived out their days completely happy. Where if she was only feeling bad for him, eventually he would, stop and be like, hey, it's time that you moved out or whatever. But because they both have that view of each other, that they need each other, or that the other one needs them, they kind of have allowed, they've let social norms kind of lapse a little bit. At least social norms at this time. When she was like, I'm 27, I was like, no one is thinking about getting married at 27 now.
No.
Her friend someone says about them, oh, she vowed to not get married until she's at least 24 because she thinks that getting married is a graveyard. I was like, 24? I don't know any 24-year-olds who are married nowadays.
No.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't even really get married, but let alone in their 20s.
Yeah.
That's what I like about this, is that, she's taking a stance. I think she just genuinely doesn't want to get married, but she also wants to be around her father and care for him in his later days. But it's not like she's just like so different from everyone else that she's othering herself, because she still has some old world values, right? Because when she meets her dad's friend and he says, he's been remarried but being a widow, she's just so offended by it, because in her mind, that's not correct. So she is nuanced in that way. And I love that, as opposed to just making her some sort of like clearly sending a message. It's just no, she doesn't want to get married for a reason. It's just not of interest to her. And it remains not of interest to her even when she does get married.
In like a very non-checklisty way, the script highlights for us almost every type of romantic relationship. So we get her talking to her divorced friend. She interacts with her father's assistant who is engaged. She herself is single. Her father's a widower. The one dude is remarried. Like, they talk about people who are pregnant. They talk about the one girl who really has 4 kids but says that she has 3 because she was like embarrassed. And you get like in the kind of the first half of the movie, or like a little less than the first half, you just get her reactions to like every type of relationship. And usually for all of them, it's just her being like, well, that's silly. That's ridiculous. Those people are dumb.
Yeah. I find that her character very interesting, because the way the film is set up, that they don't live in the city. They live outside of the city, and it starts off, they're doing some sort of, it's like a tea party, essentially, tea gathering. Where they're drinking tea, and it seems they're all dressed in like traditional Japanese clothing. So if you don't know what the story is about, you just assume we're set in a different time, because we don't know, really. At least I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I didn't know. And then it switches, and she's dressed in more modern clothes for the time. And you're like, oh, okay. So she's living a life that's going modern to traditional, and she's balancing that and trying to figure things out. And like, she is technically very young, but like obviously not young for the time or for the culture she's living in. I mean, even I'm sure in America, 27, most people in the 40s were married already, well deep in having kids. So it's interesting the way of having a character like that at that time. And I think the way it translates today is, maybe people are not getting married, but in film, there's like the whole conversation of, when does a woman decide she wants to have a kid, and what's the deal with women who don't want to have kids? And there's always that discussion of like, well, there's technically a time limit to it. So I think it's just a story that's relatable throughout generations. It will continue to be relatable.
And like you said, it's not just specific to getting married. I mean, it is, because that's what her story is. But anything where, a parent is like, hey, what if you blah, blah, blah. And the kid's like, why? I'm happy.
No, I mean, I think we can all relate to that. I'm sure we've all had that type of discussion with our parents, whether it's, jobs, lifestyles, or whatnot. So, but what interested me a lot in this is that, this was filmed during World War II time. And when we get into the city, we see a lot of like, there's a sign for like Coca-Cola, and we see a
Yeah.
lot of Americanisms already in there, which brings again that division of, traditional Japanese lifestyles or areas of the country versus the cities that are adapting to more modern worlds and lifestyles, and how she goes between those two. Because she is in, I think the way her father, her friends who still live in that area, and her aunt specifically think of her as being like the city girl who's probably learning too much and is just, not following the family tradition. Whereas like she's still technically a small town girl with things she just wants to be near her dad. But I think the background of like the what's going on in the country itself is interesting at the time. I felt it certainly watching it. I don't know if you felt the fact that they're going through a transition Japan at this time.
At the time that the movie was made, the Allied forces still had a hand over like what could and couldn't be made for the Japanese public. Like they're censoring this movie, which is if you watch this movie, you're like,
No,
what are you censoring? Why do you what do you care? But I'm curious, like when Shukichi and his friend are talking about Noriko and how she's doing better, they kind of like
mhm.
chuckle. They say like, "Oh, how hard it must have been for her." Ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
Ha. It's like, "Oh, that's not really like funny like at all." And
no,
so it makes you wonder, is that some did they have to kind of soften the impact of the war on civilians a little bit? And that Coke sign as they're riding their bikes, it sticks out. But if you were to go back, that might be like a real menacing sign to a Japanese civilian in 1949. I don't know. To me, watching it now, I'm like, oh, that's just so funny how it's framed and like it's kind of part of the charm of the whole movie, but that's me viewing it. And so it might be really, really, really different. I wonder if like Gary Cooper,
yeah,
like is that part of like the diminishing of the Japanese way of thinking and like the implementing of some like American ideas. I know that they did remove one scene where they go to a graveyard, supposedly because it was about like ancestor worship. So yeah, I don't know. I would be not surprised to find out a lot of
yeah.
this would be manipulated by Americans to brainwash people. Go figure. But it's hard to
Yeah.
say.
It's interesting when you look back at films like that because, like you said, like what would you possibly censor in this movie?
Right.
That
What do you have a problem with?
it's like nitpicking, really, at that point. But speaking of Gary Cooper, actually, so we have her aunt who is very. She's made it her mission to get her niece married.
Yeah.
And she just finds it unnatural that her brother, who is Nariko's father, hasn't kind of pushed it at this point and is just kind of okay with her being there. She's too old at this point. So she's made it her mission to find people. The first person they thought of was his assistant, but he's been engaged for a long time.
Right.
And then they find someone else. And she says, well, he looks like that American actor that you really like, who was in that baseball movie. And she's like, oh, yeah, Gary Cooper. The baseball movie, for anyone who's listening, is called Pride of the Yankees, which I've seen. It's very good. I thought it was funny that that was the one, but I thought of it. I was like, okay, that makes sense. It was
Right.
released not that long before that. So that would be the one they talk about. Gary Cooper being the person that would entice her to be like, okay, maybe I guess I could
Right.
talk. It was like, I feel that. I was like, that's so beyond relatable. It's like, that's me too. But what I find the most interesting about this, and I think is really smart, and of course he did it on purpose, was that we never see this man.
Mm, right.
And we don't see them getting married. We see her preparing for the marriage, but she's
Yeah.
speaking to her father, speaking to her aunt, speaking to her father. How did you read why that was done?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure because it's not like we only ever see them relating to each other. And like I said, we see her talking with a lot of different people. We see him talking with
Mhm.
different people. I don't know. Could be maybe he just was like, instead of hiring someone to pay him, we can save a whole 2 days on this schedule if
I mean, there could be two reasons. One could also be they couldn't find anyone who actually looked like Gary
look like Gary
Cooper.
Cooper.
But I don't know. I just kind of felt that it wasn't important because he's not important to her. And then maybe
Yeah.
it would have been weird dynamic where if we saw them together, either we would be even more depressed if she looks super miserable, or we would be like, oh, maybe she's in love now. And I don't think that's the point. I think the
Yeah.
point is her trying to figure out how to let go without actually wanting to.
Yeah. That was my non-joke point was going to be if she isn't totally into him, because we as the audience are totally into her. At least I am. And
Yep.
I think
Same.
she is so charming and interesting and funny. I don't take her as like just, a simple country girl who doesn't want to leave home. She's intelligent, she's capable, she has character, she has personality. She just knows what she likes and she knows what she wants to do and what she doesn't want
Yeah.
to do. And so if she kind of left him meaning her father, and we had
Mhm.
any sense that she wasn't totally happy or as happy, then yeah, it might be really, really depressing, even though I think this movie is incredibly depressing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It would have added a layer that I didn't necessarily want.
The way that this movie ends is like absolutely devastating.
I do want to talk about that too, for sure, but we can save it for a little bit
Sure.
afterwards because I like to end on a downer. No,
Sure.
I speak
Yeah,
about a
I
film.
do too.
But we were talking about before we started, really still talking about Noriko, talking about the actress, her smiling, okay? Because
Yeah.
we don't see that very often unless it's like a comedy or something, or
Yeah.
there's something going on. I loved it because she's beautiful and I think it fits so well with the character. But you're telling me that some people hate this, not you, but some people
Yeah.
hated that. And I was like, I could see that. I feel like some haters would be like, why is she smiling all the time? It's like,
Mhm.
maybe it's just because some people don't fully hate their lives all the time. I know most of us can't relate to that, but I think that's some people's personalities. It's just like naturally to smile,
Mhm.
even if it's like an anxious thing of like, it's a tick of theirs just to smile at all things. She has a great smile. I think it works. How do you feel about the actress's choice or the direction for her to constantly have that smile? And then when she doesn't smile, you really feel it.
That's precisely, I think, what the point is. You
Mhm.
know, like I mentioned towards the beginning, we're not doing a lot of tricks with the camera, right? For the most part, this movie's at least 95 to 99% static shots.
Mhm.
As I rewatched it, I kept time. I play drums, and so it's easy for me to count as I'm doing other things. And I just kept track of the average length of any shot. And while the camera isn't moving, the average shot was like 20 to 25 seconds long. So we're
Mm.
cutting, we're not staying. Modern filmmakers, when they do a static shot, usually it's to impress us with how far the actors can go, how much they can pull off in one take, right? We love
Mhm.
oneers. We love oneers that move, but when the camera doesn't move and it just sits there, usually there's something on display that we don't want to distract from. Not the case in these
No.
movies. We're cutting to him. He's saying two words. We're cutting back to her. What happens is it's odd, right? It's odd that she smiles and she's smiling as she's calling this dude filthy
Yeah.
for remarrying. And I think that one person I saw called it manic. Like they're like, what's up with this manic smiling?
Oh.
I don't take it that way at all. just seems closer to like a silent film,
Mm.
where we're really displaying with our face. And she smiles so far into the movie, and then, like you said, until she doesn't. And then you maybe didn't realize how enamored you were with her. And when I say this, like, I'm not talking like, I'm not like romantically in love with
No, yeah. I
Setsuhara,
feel the same way.
but she's so charming. And
Mhm.
Shukichi, her dad, like, they're both very, very
Yeah.
charming. When she first comes into the house and he's like, make us tea, right? We're like, oh, I don't like that. What's going on here? This is not cool. But then when she
No.
brings a friend home, he brings in a tray of tea and bread for them, and he's helpless and forgot spoons and sugar. And so there is a reciprocal, like, nature to them helping each other and, like, getting tea for each other.
Hmm.
So I love it. I love her. Like, watching these three movies, I watched them in order. I was just like, she's the greatest actress I've ever seen in my life. Like
She's great.
I walked away just like, she should be in everything. Like, this is outrageous. She's amazing. I love, like, when an actor has like a magnetic quality to where you're
Hmm.
just like drawn to them. We're so distracted in everything, and like a lot of people, primarily the movies that they're watching, you're watching at home. You're not going into a
Yeah.
theater in the dark where, it's really rude to get up and grab something or like look at your phone or whatever. And so when an actor can cut through like time and space and everything in your life and draw your attention to them, that's
Hmm.
amazing. And I feel like she really has that. So I love the smiling. I think it's great. It makes her peculiar, and like, not peculiar in a weird way, but peculiar in, an individual way.
She's just really interesting. And I like that she, is not doing it so that she seems nice on the outside to
Mhm.
people. That's just who she is. And like, she's just great to watch. Like, even when she's on the bike, I was like, oh my God, she looks like she's having so much fun. Like, should I ride a bike?
Yeah.
I'm not going to, but I'm considering it. Like, you know, it looks
You're
like
not a bike
fun.
person?
Not anymore.
Oh no. Okay. All right.
No, that's Dara, my partner, loves too. He's always like, let's go on a bike ride. I'm like, you go on a bike ride and I'll watch a movie. I will tell you what it's like after you come back.
Did you
I
look into
should,
how
I
they did
should.
that shot?
I read something, but like if you have more, I didn't read it too much information about it.
Yes, like, so as I've said, I think three times now, Ozu, we're doing all static shots, and it's
Yeah.
it's amazing. It doesn't feel gimmicky. It's beautiful. It's amazing. So we're doing these scenes of them riding the bikes, and it looks like they're riding like on stationary bikes that are like being pulled by
Hmm.
a truck or something, because
Yeah.
they're completely in frame. The camera's moving with them, and that's not the case. They rode and drove like at the same. They had to do it a bunch of times so that they could get it right. And then all the other shots of them riding, the camera is set up, and they're either, driving away, I mean,
Hmm.
riding away, riding towards it, and then there's a few where it's pushing and pulling with them, but it looks great.
No, it does. That's a little bit of action for you. And
Right.
then action.
Well, there's one pan shot as she's walking down a road, and the camera just ever so slightly goes to the right and then
Mhm.
stops. And it's like, why that? Why? Why? Okay. Like, yeah, sure, whatever.
That is interesting now that you bring that up. I actually hadn't thought about that. But who knows? It's interesting because whenever I think of his films, and I think people think of them as like quiet,
Hmm.
not necessarily serious, but they can be. I just envision him as like an old man, just like
Hmm.
who was forever old, like very serious. And then you look at him and like the most popular pictures of him, he's wearing like a little bucket hat. He looks like a little
Hmm.
hipster. And I was like, wow, this guy was just so cool.
I think his stuff is hilarious. I think this
Hmm.
movie is hilarious. The ending is
Oh yeah.
not.
No.
But almost every part of this has, and again, I'm, 2024, an American dude. I'm looking at this very different from how they'd be looking at it. Maybe they thought it would be funnier, or maybe they would have thought it was not funny at all. But to me, there's humor throughout all of it. Like I said, when she's like really giving that guy the business in the diner, and he's like,
I know.
"Oh, I guess I'm in trouble, right?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I guess I'm not a good person." And she's like, "That's right."
I know. That is funny because he's just
So,
not taking it seriously at all. He's like, okay.
yeah. And then she does the same thing. Like Nariko has this awesome like teasing about her when she's in the room with a little boy who's in trouble and
Mhm.
making fun of this little kid who's like crying maybe. It's great.
Mhm.
But Ozu loves little boys in baseball caps.
Yep.
He loves it. And I love it. It's so funny. It's so great. His
Yep.
stuff with little
That's his
kids
vibe.
is like some of the
Mhm.
best little kid stuff. It's like you're watching the Little Rascals if the Little Rascals were super funny all the time.
Yeah, I think there's certain directors who are really good at getting the best performances out of kids.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's some sort of thing where they just maybe are so in tune with their childhood that they know how to do it. Like he's one, and I think of Desika as being one. This being said, the stuff with his kids is sometimes even more depressing. But he gets some great performances out of kids who've never acted before in their lives.
Right.
Where you're like, this is like an Oscar worthy performance. And he just picked you up off the street.
Yeah.
It's like them just knowing how to talk to kids and relate to kids, because as people like ourselves who have kids, you can talk to them like you're going to talk to your buddies, but that kid's just going to be like, I don't care what you're saying. Not that you have to dumb down your speech, but you have to relate to what they're going through as much as we're well past those years.
Right. Right. I love when people without kids think that people with kids are making things up that their kids say.
Yeah.
And you're like, no. You have no idea the stuff that they think of and comes out of their mouth and the things that they do with very little programming. Turns out people have personalities of their own and they say crazy stuff.
Yep. Truly. Some of the stuff where you're like, oh, okay. Maybe we might need to talk about that in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, kids are interesting. Even adult kids, as you see in this film. But before we get to the ending, are there any parts that we haven't discussed yet that you want to chat about before we get to depression?
I guess I just wanted to ask you two main things. One, the aunt. I don't see her as a caricature of like the busybody type woman, like the annoying family member. She seems, somewhat kind and normal. I think that she just, and this is like my question for you as a lady is, am I reading it wrong that she's just seeing a supposed like lack in the family because his wife died, and so she's kind of putting herself in there and being like, hey, she needs to get married, and hey, maybe you need to get married too.
That's how I read it. I don't think she means to be mean. I think she means well. She's going about it in an annoying way, obviously, because those type of things, if that's your goal, you're going to be annoying about it. I think she's like, she doesn't have a woman in her life who will push her. She probably thinks if her mom was still there, her mom would have pushed her into this a long time ago. She's probably like, maybe she feels like she failed in waiting so long to do it. That's how I felt. Like, yes, she is annoying, but she's not like a bad person. You can understand that there's people like that and it's annoying, but like we all have, whether it's your own parent or members of your family who are like pushing you to do stuff that is just traditional. Traditions that they refuse to acknowledge that we are moving past and breaking. So, yeah, I think it was important. Like, there would be no way that she wouldn't have that pressure from someone in her life, whether it was the aunt or it would be the friends. Because even when she goes off to her friend, I think her name's Aya, to kind of cry about the fact that her father plans on remarrying, she's like, well, this is why you need a man. She just was like bluntly about it, and Noriko is obviously offended by that. But a lot of people would think that, just be like, just get it over and done with. I think in their mind, they think, just get married. You don't need to love him. Just do it to appease everyone and continue living the life that you lead. But in her mind, she's like, I can't do that if I'm not
Yeah.
in my house around my father.
Yeah.
So the aunt is interesting. I think she's incredibly important to the story because she's really pushing things along in her own little way. And I felt weird and sad when, Nariko does agree, says, yes, fine, I will marry him. And she's just so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I feel like if it was me, I would be so annoyed by her and I'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
get out of here. But then you're kind of like, she's genuinely happy.
Right. Right.
So it's hard to watch, but you also are like, you're not a monster. You just,
No,
there's
the scene between her and the dad where she's talking about someone at their own wedding eating. She's like, at my wedding, I barely ate a single rice ball. And the dad's like, well, that's just how it is nowadays. If you got married now, you'd be eating. And she's like, well, I wouldn't eat the sashimi. He's like, yeah, you would. And she doesn't fight it. She's like, yeah,
yeah.
maybe, So yeah, she's not a monster. And I'm always so grateful when an old film defies like caricatures, like they let her be a full person. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about was so this movie's made by Shochiku Films, which was founded in 1895, which is insane, and they're still producing films. And so they put on kabuki shows, and we get that scene in the middle of this when they go. I don't know if it's an opera. I don't know enough about it to.
Yeah.
This scene makes me fall asleep every single time. It doesn't matter how wide awake I am. I've seen this movie now like 3 or 4 times, and every single time it gets to this scene, and I just like immediately, I don't know what it is. Something about the music and how long it is. And there's a lot going on with, the characters looking at each other. But I'm just like immediately like NyQuil.
Yeah. NyQuil. It's so funny. Anytime I see any of those style of plays, it brings me right back to university because I took theater classes and that's one era that you study a lot. And I was like, I think it's fascinating, but it's also kind of boring a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find that about, I don't want to shit on plays because I feel like every time I do go to a play, which is not often, I'm always like, oh, wow, I should see more live theater. But then like, it's like 10 years later. I just like, it doesn't occur to me to go to see live theater ever.
I love live theater. I was poor growing up, so I didn't go to Broadway a lot. I'm of the opinion that it doesn't matter what you see on Broadway, all of it's going to be incredible. I saw the live action Wedding Singer on Broadway, and it was still incredible. Yeah, they made a live action Wedding Singer.
Love that.
But it was still great. Like, but there's always a point of the show, maybe like 75% of the way through where you're just like, you're getting really warm in your seat.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm going to fall asleep right now. Like somebody has to get shot. Like something has to happen because I'm like done.
Yeah.
Like, please end this now.
Yeah. It's just like the etiquette is also different where you're like, I feel like I can't even shuffle in my seat a bit without someone giving me the evil eye. Which is fair, but you know.
Theater seats are always so much closer than like cinema seats too.
Yes, I know.
Like you are packed
on top of each other
in there. And I also feel like lighting is also very, very different. In the theater, the light is projected from behind you onto the screen and pretty much everything is dark. But depending on what play you're seeing, you might be like looking around like, hey, I can see all these people. And movies are better.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but I'll
say it. I don't care.
I do love that scene though, when she starts looking at both of them and she, it's just one acting and the fact that Ozu started his career in silent film and kept it on longer than most people did because he was still making silent films when, sound, talkies essentially were a thing.
Yeah.
But I think he's just such a great director in getting performances out of actors that there was not that much dialogue needed in the scene at all to get the point across to her and we as the audience as well. So I love that. Another scene, if we're going to get into the final scene, there's a bit of dialogue leading up to it, obviously, but the final shot, there's no dialogue. But at this point, she's gotten married and they're having a conversation, father and daughter, about, she's going to live her own life. And she's essentially saying, I'm not going to be happy I'm just not going to be. And he's like, you are going to have to be. He's essentially kind of begging her to be because he doesn't
Right.
want to hear that she's not going to be happy. He's like, maybe just say it for me so that I don't fully hate my life. And she does it because she loves her father. She's like, okay, I will try and be happy for you.
Right.
And that's even just talking about it. I'm like getting super emotional thinking about
Mm-hmm.
that. Of just like saying, I'm going to be happy. Don't worry about me. I didn't mean to stress you out, which is such a wish she says, I didn't mean to make you feel uneasy about it. Don't worry about it. I'll be fine. She goes off, and the final shot is him. He's peeling, I think it's an apple and orange.
Yeah.
And you can see it wash over him where he's like, oh shit, she's not going to be happy. And I have to live with that. And then the movie just ends. You're like,
Yeah.
well, we're all living with that now too.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's devastating. It's absolutely horrible. The whole thing where he's like, "Yeah, I'm getting married," and he's like, "Ah, no, I'm not." Like,
Yeah.
like, and you're gonna be this, and it's like, no. And I don't know how old he's supposed to be.
I think he said like he's not super old. He's like in his early 60s.
Right. Okay. So I think sometimes, I have two kids and I don't think about it all the time. It's like, okay, if I were to drop dead tomorrow, like what would happen to them?
Yeah.
But he's later in life. I don't believe she has a job.
I don't know. I thought she was maybe doing some stuff at the university, but I don't think she works a job.
Yeah. And so he could be thinking, like, okay, she needs to get married in case something happens to
Mhm.
me. I mean, something happened to his wife. And so it's like not outside of the realm of possibility. And so while he might not be happy, he might be thinking, like, this is the way that it has to go. But now he is alone. And it's horrible. It's horrible. Like, I think we said before we started recording about how Ozu does these like gut punch things. And it's a great testament to how he's able to draw you in to these characters without giving you big displays of pyrotechnics
Mhm.
and monologuing. How often in a Western modern film are you with a character until they deliver this huge monologue and suddenly you're like, "Oh, I see them differently," right? Like your eyes
Mhm.
open, you realize what their character is, all of the things in their arc that were hidden to you until now become apparent. None of that stuff. Absolutely none of
No.
that. He doesn't do any of it. And it's not until the ending when you realize like how invested you are in them. And like you said, it's just over.
Which is honest, right? Like it has to be over at that point because, we don't need to know, we don't need to see what's going to happen for both of these characters. We already know.
Yeah.
So let it end in that. And it's not to kind of demonize him. It's just more like it's also making him more human and like doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've been a parent, parents still make mistakes in certain
Yeah.
ways. Parents still push, but he didn't mean it in a way that was, I don't know, mean. He loves her very much and he was
No, I don't think
worried.
he's trying to get rid of her.
He would love
No.
to have just someone
Yeah.
continue to care for him. And
Yeah.
they got along very well. Like I love when they take their last vacation together.
Yeah.
That's really sweet. And like we
Yeah.
talked about, they go see the play, but it's really sweet for them to just kind of have a nice little send off. And she says to him, she's like, I wish this could last forever.
Yeah.
And he keeps
Why
being like,
why
well, it
can't it just always
can't.
be like
Yeah.
this?
And it could have, but
Right. And I think that's the trap of parenthood is you have this kid, you birth this kid, they're with you. You plug all the information that you know into them
uh
and until, puberty through early 20s, until that point, it's you and them and your relationship is not changing. Like the dynamic remains the same. You're the old person who
mhm.
knows everything and they're the kid. And I think that life has a way of healthily breaking that. But then you come back together as, okay, well, now we're two grown-ups and I'm your
Mhm.
parent. And the relationship can stay this, it can actually be the same for years and years and years. And there's no other relationship like that, like
No.
in life. Like, friends, when you think about you and your parent, it's almost always like together, like how do we relate in the decisions that we make in our lives? Where with your friends, they have their own life. They have their own
Mhm.
family unit. And so they're thinking about, they have to make their own decisions and they have to move on. And yeah, the parent relationship, it's like it's the parent trap,
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that he's always explored that in his films because it's like one of my favorite things when with my friends is when I meet them with their parents
Mhm.
because you see them in a different light where you're like, oh, wow, that's the person who raised you. And then you see how they interact with their parents because it tells you a lot how people interact with their parents.
Yep.
So I think that's just like a really cool thing to explore. And the way he's done it, he did it through his career. And this one here is obviously very special. So, I mean, if you like this one, there's a couple more like it
Yeah. Yeah.
for
You're in luck.
you to watch.
Yeah.
So definitely check those out. But I think that was late spring. I think we covered what we wanted to cover
Yeah.
for it. But I do still have a couple more questions for you, still relating to Ozu and late spring. Same two questions in the last segment of the show. And first being, you said you've seen quite a few Ozu films. He's a director that's known, again, I hate saying this, but he's known amongst film people, probably not amongst the average person who's watching films.
Right.
So if someone decides, hey, I've heard about this Ozu person, where should I start? What film are you recommending to them?
I think it's either this one or I think that I Was Born But is the superior movie, but I would
Mm,
say either this or Good Morning
okay.
because I think I Was Born But is a little more odd. I guess it might be not everyone's type of humor, but yeah, I would say either one of those. Definitely, I think Late Spring is a good one. It's
Yeah.
easy. It's easy to understand.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's what I was gonna go for. I think the obvious one being like it's most his most known, maybe Tokyo Story, but I think this is they're good, both easy to digest, but I think this is more digestible because I don't know. I love watching both, but I think maybe I like watching this one a little bit more. So
Right. Yeah, I think it's better to watch the three in order because you can see the actors like getting older, even though it's not huge.
mhm.
That's like watching the Before trilogy. Like you have to watch it
Yeah.
in order.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a
and
great comparison. Yeah.
and to see, like I said, it's like meditations on the same theme, almost like in orchestra you'll have the overture and then you'll have a
Mhm.
piece and then you'll have when the piece comes back and it's in relation to other things that you've heard, like that is
Mhm.
Late Spring, Early Summer, or Tokyo Story. So you gotta watch them in order.
I agree.
Talk about a depressing ending, Tokyo Story. Oh my god, I don't want to get into it now, but like
Oh yeah, I'll be covering it on this one too, because yeah. Um, if you're making a double bill with Late Spring, what film or films are you pairing it with, and
whoa.
what's the reason for the pairing?
All right, I didn't think about this one. That's a good
It's okay.
question. Late spring. If I'm going to put together. So, something, all right, this is going to sound totally maybe crazy out of left field, but
Mhm.
I'm going to, I would pair Late Spring with Me and You and Everyone We Know, directed by Miranda
Mhm.
July.
Nice.
Not necessarily because there are like, I feel like they're like spiritual sisters in this movie.
Mhm.
Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's real odd and it's real weird, but I think it also explores loneliness and social norms in relationships. And I would be pretty surprised if Miranda July wasn't a fan of Ozu.
But the minute you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, that makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
She definitely has to be a fan of Ozu. There's no way she's
Yeah,
not.
on rewatch, I kept thinking about just the tempo of that movie, Me, You,
Yeah.
and Everyone We Know. And I was like, oh, huh, I never thought about it like that. So I'm glad I had that thought because I was not ready.
First, it took me a little while to think of some, and then I was like, oh no, I do know. I kind of just maybe cheated and went the father-daughter route. So I
Sure.
thought of a couple of films that focus on father-daughter relationships and how they evolve. One being, which I'm sure I've already mentioned on the show, but The Heiress, William
Yes.
Wyler,
Hmm.
which I love. That's a father-daughter relationship. He's actually not trying to marry her off, but she's not married. And she falls in love with a man who wants to marry her. And it's like the opposite, where he doesn't trust. And he just doesn't think she could get married, that no one would marry her for her. So that toxicity within that relationship, despite the fact that they were getting along really well up until she decided to have her own thoughts.
Right.
So the other one was Paper Moon,
Oh, sure.
and Bogdanovich's film, and again, just father daughter, and they've been together just themselves. They know each other's quirks. They argue a lot. There is love between them, but it's also like he's not giving her necessarily the best life because he's
No.
not fully sound himself. So just those two, I think they'd be interesting to pair. And, actually the Heiress, it might have come out the exact same year it did. And just to see how different it was.
Right.
Japanese film, American film, and how they tackled similar-ish stories. And then years later, Paper Moon, all in black and white. So
That's true.
if you want to keep that theme going. Yeah.
Paper Moon has one of my favorite ending shots ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. She jumps into the truck. The camera stays still. The truck kind of goes down. They like run behind it and she like jumps in. It's like the most dangerous thing I've ever seen someone do. And then they just go on and it's like, okay. Like you said, it's like nothing's going to get better. Like,
no,
this is not a good life, but I had a good time peeking in on it for a few hours.
Yeah. It's such a film of the time, but I say that with like love. Like it's great that we got those films of that time. But yeah, thank you so much for coming back on the show and chatting about Ozu and finding the fun in this film and finding the not so fun but needed scenes. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm always excited to come on and talk about exciting filmmakers and Ozu's. Ozu and Varda, man, those are like two people when people are looking for movies. I'm always like, have you seen anything by them? Because their perspective will change yours. You gotta get under their spell, man.
Like now I'm just thinking about the bonheur again and how everyone needs to watch that. So hey, if you want to talk about another father, there's one for you, isn't it, bonheur?
Oh my god. Yeah.
Not as sweet.
No.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia with intro music by Lamar Rocker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcast. And stay tuned for our next episode on Tokyo Twilight.